Today I'm going to share the last story in a book that I wrote called The Book of Stories. And the story is called, Ooh, That's Gotta Hurt. It's a story from when I was very young and my sister took me out in the freezing cold. And I have quite a vivid memory of the incident because my tomboy sister ended up beating up one of the bullies on the skating rink. And that image is pretty well burned in my memory. So I'm going to share that story with you. It's called, Ooh, That's Gotta Hurt. It's based on my memories of when I was 8 years old in 1960. Carol, my oldest sister, had just gotten her license to drive and was looking for a good reason to borrow the family car. We were in the midst of winter, and it was very cold, but there was hardly any snow, so she went for it. Dad, can I borrow the car to take David skating? I was playing on the floor when my head spun around with a look of surprise which said, Say what? It was about 10 degrees out, and I was perfectly happy to sit in front of the heat register and play. My toy soldiers were in the process of attacking an old West fort defended by 6 Indians, the term used in the early 60s, and 3 cowboy friends of theirs. It was really going to be a battle, so why would I want to bundle up, stand around in the cold, going nowhere on my double-edged training skates? I could still hear her begging Dad when Mom got into the discussion. Mom was reluctant to say yes, but Carol had had plenty of practice on breaking her down in the past, so she just pushed on. In my head I was cheering Mom on. Please say no. Please say no. Then I heard the dreaded words. All right, but be home by 5 and keep a close eye on your little brother. No! All I could visualize now was me looking like an overstuffed burrito in my snowsuit with 3 layers of clothing underneath. At least I wouldn't have to worry about falling with all that padding. Getting up would be the challenge. My sister rolled me into the front seat, and I can't say I was exactly sitting as much as I was outstretched and unable to bend at the waist with all the gear I had on. She turned on the car radio and put the heat up to max, and we were off. On one of the corners, I just kind of slid across into the door. I was stiff as a board, and there was no traction from the nylon fabric of my snowsuit. As we rode along, the heat started pouring out, and I was sweating like a Swede dressed in a snowsuit in a sauna. My sister didn't seem to notice my condition as she waved and beeped to her friends as she proudly passed by in Dad's '57 Chevy. She did look over at me at one point and yanked me back towards the center of the seat. It didn't last long before I helplessly slid back again at the next corner. Have you ever found yourself in a situation when you've thought to yourself, how did I ever end up like this? Well, I was feeling like that to the 10th degree as I lay there sprawled out in my sweaty suit. As my sister slowly inched the car down the steep incline to the lily pond, I began to slide off the front of the seat. Luckily, I was able to lock my legs against the dashboard to keep myself from ending up on the floor. When we reached the bottom, we were able to park close to the shelter, where everyone put on their skates. Carol grabbed my 2 hands and slid me out the door so I could stand upright. The cold wind hit me like a brick wall, and my sauna sweat was quickly turning into tiny icicles. She grabbed our skates, and then we started to walk to the inviting cabin with the smoke pouring from its chimney. I was waddling more than walking, and Carol was getting a little impatient with my slow pace. I was always full of questions, and I asked her why there was a heavy rubber guard on her skates. She explained that they kept the sharp blades from hurting anyone when being carried, and they worked well for walking across the stones from the cabin to the ice. I asked her why mine didn't have any, and she laughed and said, Kiddo, your trainers raise no threat to anyone's safety. We were almost halfway to the cabin, and my pace hadn't picked up, so Carol told me that she'd go inside and get her skates on, and then she could help me. I wasn't sure I liked the sound of that, but before I could say anything, she was going into the cabin. I think I was finally getting this waddling thing down and started to do my best impression of a baby penguin learning how to not tip over. I finally made it inside, and I flopped down on a bench near the wall. With the winds howling outside, the cabin was packed with refugees from the cold. Carol saw me catching my breath and came over to strap my double-blade beginners onto my boots. I was exhausted, but Carol was determined to get me onto the ice. Out on the ice, I ran into our neighbors from across the street, Pat and Janet. This worked out well for my sister, who now had the freedom to join her friends in playing Crack the Whip. At first, the whip was only 5, but grew to 10 or more skaters. The snow started to really come down heavily, and the winds were whipping up quite a storm. My sister and her friends were putting on quite a show for a few of us young kids who were shivering while trying to stay upright. There was another audience across the way made up of 3 hoods, who were smoking their cigarettes and mocking the squares. It did seem kind of strange seeing those tough guys standing around on skates in their black leather jackets, but they were smoking, so I guess in their mind that kept them cool. I was intrigued by the speed that the long snake of hand-in-hand skaters was building up, and I was enjoying it all when I noticed that the shortest thug was looking at me. He was pointing at me and then imitating what I looked like with my stiff arms stuck out and trying to toddle around. The 3 bullies were having a grand time laughing and pointing at me when the biggest one, let's just call him Scarface, said, "Let's have some fun and snatch some hats." The short one took off like a shot and caught up to the whip and plucked off one of the girls' hats. As he skated away, he tossed it up into the air as far as he could and laughed. Scarface told Short Stuff that he shouldn't have given it back and said, "Let me show you how it's done, sissy," and he took off. At that very moment, a gust of wind and snow almost knocked me over. After gaining my balance, I turned my back to the wind and waited for the wind to calm down. By the time I turned around, there was a big circle of kids standing around, some commotion going on in the middle. I wanted to see what was up, so I shuffled my way over. As I worked my way through the crowd of onlookers, I could hear a thumping sound and someone yelling something about, "Don't you ever mess with my hat again." As I peeked around the last kid blocking my view, I heard the short thug say, "Ooh, that's gotta hurt." And there was my sister beating away with her heavy rubber skate guards on the shoulder of Scarface. She had him pinned to the ice and he was curled up in a fetal position. He was still clutching my sister's hat, and after a few more good whacks, his fingers slowly opened and he let the hat fall to the ice. My sister scooped up her hat and said, "Let that be a lesson to ya." She saw me standing with my mouth hanging open in shock and said, "Come on, let's get out of here." In an effort to not waste any time, she got behind me and pushed me towards the car. As I went gliding across the ice, I saw the pile of cigarette butts left by the one-time bullies, and it brought a slight smile to my face. We removed our skates in the car, and we hit the road for another slippery, sliding ride home. My sister was driving a little faster now, and she was still steaming, so I was sliding around more than ever. On one of the corners, I slid right into her, and she looked down and said, "We don't need to say anything to Mom and Dad about this now, do we? Right?" I was too focused on keeping myself from landing on the floor to respond, and I slid away from her across the seat on the next corner.